First stanza. The poem opens with goodbye. Rizal expresses no regret but only gladness, knowing that in giving his life, he is giving his country the greatest gift any citizen could offer. Second stanza. Rizal says that it does not matter where one dies, but why one dies and to what purpose. All death holds the same honor if given for home and country. Third stanza. Rizal's execution was set at sunrise, thus the meaning of the first and second lines. He employs the visual senses in his poetic use of color, and then in the succeeding lines, adds the bright red tint of his blood to the scene, and gilds it with golden sunlight. The use of these devices ignites passion in the reader, even without explicit use of words signifying emotion. Fourth stanza. Since his childhood, even as other children dreamed of childish things, Rizal dreamed of seeing his country free, esteemed, and with head held high. Fifth stanza. Here, he showers her with praise. He shouts, "Hail!" as many would to their God. His joy, however, does not end in the act of dying, but continues beyond the grave, where he shall sleep in his country's mystic land through eternity. As one dies for God, Rizal dies for country. And as one looks forward to heaven, Rizal looks forward to being buried in the land of his ancestors. Sixth stanza. Here Rizal likens his soul to that of a simple humble flower amidst thick grasses. The use of this comparison says a lot about how Rizal sees himself, a timid man surrounded by the unrelenting forces of society. He imagines that after his death, he will live on in the bosom of his motherland, and he begs her to express her love with a kiss. Seventh stanza. Rizal's love for nature is again depicted in these lines. It is interesting that he enumerates the moon, the dawn, the wind, and a bird to pay homage to his grave, yet does not mention close friends or specific people. Perhaps it is a simple image of his reunion with nature that he wants to bring to mind. Perhaps it is also an expression of the loneliness and isolation that he has felt and continues to feel in his fight for freedom. Eighth stanza. The mention here, of a friend, is the closest he gets to company. And the mention of God in the last line is the closest he gets to praying for a spiritual heaven. Ninth stanza. In these lines he gives his motherland a list of the things he wishes her to pray for. He remembers all of the martyrs, as well as the mothers, wives, and children they have left behind who suffer no less for being abandoned. He also, in a hopeful closing note, asks her to pray for herself. 10th stanza. Clearly Rizal has not imagined that a monument would eventually be built over his grave and has pictured his final resting place as a humble cemetery where he shall, even after death, sing a song of devotion for his motherland. 11th stanza. Rizal wishes to be scattered as he returns to be part of the dust that covers the land he is about to die for. What actually happens in real life is an uncanny parallel. On December 30, 1896, on the day of his execution, Rizal's remains were buried in an unmarked grave in the Paco cemetery. Years later, his remains were exhumed, and on December 30, 1912, they were brought to their final resting place in the base of the monument at Luneta. 12th stanza. The first line begins following the assumption that our hero's ashes have now been spread over the land. Rizal envisions that once he has returned to her in this manner, it will no longer matter if the country forgets him because he will be with her, everywhere, as dust in the atmosphere, blowing in the skies, in the wind, and still singing songs of devotion. 13th stanza. Here we come to a more submissive yet hopeful tone. Rizal bids farewell to his one great love, his country, and yet looks forward to being with God, where there are no slaves, tyrants or hangmen. Last stanza. To close, Rizal now finally mentions specific people, parents, brothers, friends of his childhood. In other translations, the penultimate line reads, "Adios sweet tender foreigner, my friend, my happiness." Historians claim this may allude to Josephine Bracken, whom many believe he secretly married an hour before his death.